welcome back to Coaching with the Bible, episode 137, season 3, episode 28. The portion of the week this week is also a double as last week, Acharei Mot Kedoshim, very important stuff, lots and lots of commandments, lots of conversation around holiness, super important subject and topic. Also this week, the reading and the study of the third chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers. Our topic of the week, hating others. I'm not advocating, spoiler alert, I'm not advocating that we should hate other people. But I do want to understand it, and I do want to work on in the coaching space for the betterment of ourselves and our own lives, how to release hate that we hold and we harbor in our souls, in our beings, in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts. It's not an easy subject. We too often use the word hate loosely. And by doing so, we corrupt our understanding of it, our ability to work on it and deal with it, and then really our ability to eliminate it from our beings. We're not even going to get into self-hatred this week. That's also an important topic. I hope at some point we'll get to that subject and we'll talk about the way we sort of hate ourselves and what that means and what that does to us, how it holds us back. But for this week, simply hating others. And when I say that we use it loosely, we talk about hating certain foods. We talk about hating teams in sports. I hate that team. I remember years ago, the Seinfeld episode where they hate the Drake. There's someone who has the last name Drake. And at some point in the episode, something to do with a wedding or a wedding gift or whatever it is. First, they love the Drake, and then they hate the Drake. And so we use it and we sort of abuse that term. And as I said earlier, as a result of that, when it's really serious and it's really there and it's really present as real hate, we don't get all the way there. I was reading this really interesting book on the concept of baseless hatred, which we won't get to either this week. But the concept of baseless hatred is simply just the idea in the Judaism is the idea that the reason the Talmud gives as to why the Second Temple was destroyed was for a concept of baseless hatred. Simply the idea that people hated each other without reason. As if to say that if there was a reason, it would be okay to hate. But the concept of baseless hatred, in Hebrew, it's known as sinat chinam. It's what you might call, the loose translation would be free hatred, but it's hatred based on nothing. To even get to the concept of baseless hatred in the book, it's written by a gentleman by the name of René Levy, who is a professor, I think, at the University of Washington. I met him 10 years ago. 10 years ago on Passover, I was serving as the rabbi at a program in Florida. He and his family had traveled for part of the holiday to join that program in Florida from Seattle, Washington. At some point in the course of the week, he just came over to me. He gave me this book. It's called Baseless Hatred: What it is and what you can do about it. And it's a real deep dive into the psychology and actually the science of hatred, and then the extension into baseless hatred, and then he discusses the possibility of the question of perhaps the unique hatred within the Jewish community that it's discussing there in the Talmud, if that's a different kind of hatred. Now, in different communities, they've experienced all kinds of hatred. The Jewish community has its form of hatred that it suffers anti-Semitism. Racism is a form of hatred. All discrimination is a form of hatred that exists in the world. There are all kinds of hatred and hate that exists in the world. So the larger sort of, let's say, societal issue around hate, which is clearly, spilling over the edges at this point, if not exploding out of the can, is also beyond the scope of Coaching with the Bible. That's not something we can deal with. Only we're here in this space to focus and deal with how we work with and how we deal with and how we suffer through the notion of hate. And let's begin with the following, which is a quote I saw in an article in Psychology Today about the concept of hate and trying to overcome theirs. The focus is specifically about the difference between hatred and anger, or in hate and other forms of language around hate that we associate and we connect to hate. Anger is one of them. Resentment is another. Contempt is a third. They all sort of go together. But here's the quote that he uses from the musical South Pacific. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little head. You've got to be carefully taught. The sense is that from the research and the science is that hate is not an inborn trait. It's not something that we are born with. Obviously, it's in us in some way, but it's not something that we naturally sort of attach to. It's something that we are taught. Little children, per se, they may not like playing with other children. They may not like sharing their toys, but that is not hate. Hate is then taught. It is inculcated through the course of education, through the course of teaching, through the course of action, over the course of time, over the course of years. It becomes then embedded in the system, embedded in the core of an individual as a result of that. So we have to appreciate that that's true. But the reality of it is that for a variety of reasons, we do, let's admit, we do come to not simply just dislike other people. We go beyond disliking someone. And we'll say it, right? We've said it. I've said it. You've said it. I hate that person. It's not something that I'm angry at that person. I hate that person. And anger and hatred show up differently. Anger is much more palpable. It is also often much shorter range in terms of the time frame with which anger persists. Hatred can exist below the surface. It can be cold hatred, which is less obvious than sort of the heated and the hot that you see perhaps in the public domain, in the public sphere. Cold hatred is more calculated. It's perhaps more pernicious and maybe even more dangerous. But we use the term, I hate that person. And we have to really deal with it. Where it comes up in the Bible, for the sake of coaching with the Bible, is that in the Bible this week, it does talk about the idea that we should not hate our brother in our heart. It is a verse in, I believe it's in the 19th chapter of Leviticus, comes up in this week's reading. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. So we should not bear any sort of form of hatred. At the same time, the Bible also talks about that if you see the animal of your enemy crumbling under a load, that you have to help him out. And so the language that it uses around an enemy is the person who hates you, or the person that you hate. So there is something there, that in a space where perhaps somebody has wronged you, that you have some level of hatred. But overall speaking, hatred is not a trait that we want to carry around. Love is the trait that we want to carry around. And we carry it, it becomes emotional baggage for us. It actually weighs us down. It changes our emotional response and our emotional intelligence and our emotional reaction. And then it manifests itself actually physically. It can actually impact our health. In the same way that we talked about other like kindness last week that can impact our health to the positive, hatred can really impact us to the negative. And so we have to appreciate that that's actually true, that bearing that kind of sense of hate is actually harming us and it's impacting our lives. And we know the reality that for the most part, that when we have hatred, it's actually not hurting the person in that way, unless we take it out physically on them, right? Just bearing hate for someone or spewing hate towards someone really is only hurting us. It doesn't really hurt the person that is being hated. The reality of it also is, let's take it a step further, is that hatred more often than not shows its teeth in groups as opposed to in individuals. But we also know that we talk about it in the space of individuals too. So if there was a teacher that you had in school, you hated that teacher, there's usually a reason. So there's a logic often and an explanation often for the hatred that you bear. The teacher wronged you, the teacher embarrassed you. There's a person who used to be a friend is no longer a friend, and you not just don't talk to them or don't associate with that person. There's an emotional feeling of disdain, of contempt, of more than simply just dislike that goes to the space of hatred that you feel for that person. And again, there may be a reason. They wronged you, they embarrassed you, they humiliated you, whatever it is. So there's a logic to it. There's an explanation for it. It doesn't necessarily justify it. And so as much as we can appreciate sort of the physical impact that hatred has on us and the emotional, psychological impact that it has on us, we can also appreciate that on the flip side of that, we do want to do something to get rid of it. And how do we do that? Where does that come in? What is sort of a process that we can, work on and work through to get to the other side of hate? So the first one, and this is super hard. I'm not going to deny that this is easy business, working on our hatred, but this is how we get better as people, is dealing with the most difficult and the deepest issues that we're working on. And I'm not talking here necessarily about the deep psychological aspects of the hatred that we bear. We're focused here specifically in the space of putting together some sort of a structure, a strategy, a scheme by which we can overcome this and we can move past it, and we can not just ignore it, but we can actually get better as a result of it and come out on the other side of it, sort of eliminating this that's holding us back, that's hurting us physically, emotionally, psychologically, and I think spiritually as well. The first thing that you see in a lot of the literature on the subject is trying to talk to the person that you hate. Now, that is not easy. I mean, think about it. And if you can, in your mind, think about a person, even if you're making it up for the moment. I'm going to assume that none of you have anyone out there that you hate, that you bear some sort of a grudge against, that's sort of attached to your hatred. Again, for whatever the reason, whatever the incident or set of incidents is, but you have hate for that person. Can you talk inside that hatred to sort of get to the other side of that? Not immediately coming out to the conversation of why you have this feeling for that person. I'm not sure you ever get there. That would be a super large step to take right off the bat, and that's a big swing. I'm not sure that's the swing you want to take. Let's talk incremental steps. A nod, a hello, a smile when you see the person. Casual conversation. It's awkward. It might be uncomfortable. I would imagine in some cases, in a lot of cases, that person has no idea how you feel about them. Some cases they do, but in some cases they really don't. And it's not about them here. It's about you. So can you begin to break the ice? Let's use that term, break the ice, by having some sort of a conversation around that person. That would be the first thing. The second thing I might consider here is, we've talked about this too in multiple spaces with respect to coaching with the Bible and getting better with ourselves and better in our lives and more balanced and just simply moving forward into spaces of positivity, is the ability of appreciating perhaps their side of that story. Right? So we talked about like a kindness that you can do for somebody else last week is sort of on some level stepping into their shoes and minimally and just appreciating where they're coming from in this situation. Here on the hate side of it, again, it's not to excuse perhaps what the person did or how the person has behaved or how they've acted or what has led you to feel hatred towards them. Not to excuse it, but to understand it, to get to the sort of the pathology of it and to go deeper on it, which perhaps helps you bypass it and get beyond it, become more empathetic towards that individual in some sort of large, more global way that reduces the grudge that you bear, reduces the burden that you bear for that person in terms of the hatred that you bear because of that burden. In keeping with the quote from Martin Luther King, which we'll have another quote in just a second, that he decided to stick to love because hate is too great a burden to bear. So that's the same thing here. So the first thing you're doing here is, as I said, is trying to talk to the person to break that ice, to have that first conversation. The second thing is perhaps to figure out how do you get to the other side of that person's feelings, of your feelings towards that person. And then the third thing is, which is a great little, I think, 5-step process to diffuse the hatred that I saw. It's actually a mnemonic from the word hate, which is this: healing aggressive thoughts emotionally. Healing aggressive thoughts emotionally. H, healing, A, aggressive, T, thoughts emotionally. And here, it's related in that, but this is like a system that you can perhaps use that actually really works. Number one, when you begin to feel hateful thoughts, and this is quoted from an article I saw on a website called Everyday Health, when you begin to feel hateful thoughts, take that breath. Not 1, 5. 5 slow in and outs. Deep. Give yourself a minute. You want to diffuse the hatred here. You want to reduce it and get past it and not have it affect you any longer. But it doesn't just like go away immediately. So the first thing here is the deep breath. So let that air in, let it out. Hear yourself actually breathe, I think is probably better. That's step one. Step two is to consciously challenge the thoughts. Now, this goes further than what I said to you just before, which is to try to understand it. Perhaps you're not even just understanding it. Challenge the root at which the hatred comes from. Number three is to replace the harmful, hateful thought with something more calm and rational. So that could be simply just an introspection where it's not about them, it's about you. Where it's, I don't really hate, I know it's manifesting, it's showing itself as hate, but I have I have strong negative feelings about this person. Simply just changing the language really helps. Number four, here, and I don't love this, but I definitely practice this, is avoid the person. So if your feelings are directed at another person, limit your contact with that person. Being around the person that is the subject of your hatred is not helpful. I can't say that any more simply. It's not helpful. And so avoid it. Avoid the contact, avoid the interaction. If that person lives near you, I'm not saying cross the street, but limit the interaction. You don't have to see that person. If the person doesn't live near you, then it's a lot easier than simply just sort of let the relationship sort of, wilt away. Don't interact, don't contact, don't engage it. And then perhaps last, after you're limiting contact, if it's not working, so then some sort of distraction strategy might be in order here. Again, I don't love these, but these do work, where you're refocusing your mind. So you're doing something else. So you're going for a run, you're going to lift some weight, you're going to maybe hit the bag, right? We have a punching bag in the basement here. And so there are those moments when you're just enraged and you're angry, and whatever it is, that grudge is coming out, and just all of it, all that hate is coming out for whatever reason, you hit the bag. But it helps to distract. And so any of these things can really help sort of move you into spaces that just simply, if nothing else, get you past the hatred that you're feeling. I don't necessarily love them because I don't think they actually solve what you're trying to solve for, but they do help. There is a statement in the second chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers that one of the things that takes a person out of the world, let's put that in quote, takes a person out of the world, which basically is an idea that it leads towards a person's life being short and reduced, is hatred of others, hating people. One can understand why that is. As we said, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, hate rears its ugly head throughout everything that we're doing, and it impacts everything that we're doing. So we can be smarter, we can be better, and we can allow ourselves to figure out ways to bypass, overcome, and avoid hate, and replace hate. If we can't get to love, than simply just to replace hate with neutral. Replace hate with nothing, with the space of even keel, balanced, no impact. It doesn't affect me any longer. And I think ultimately then we find ourselves into a much better space in our own lives. To end with a quote, as we always do, here's a quote from Martin Luther King, as I mentioned before. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. As always, look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great one.